Welcome to another episode of Meet the Maker. I'm Jennifer Pfaff-Smith, and I'm the Naples, Palm Beach, and Miami Homes editor at Luxe Interiors and Design magazine. As part of Black History Month, Luxe is speaking with artisans whose work examines themes of Black history and culture. Today, I have the honor of speaking with an incredible Fort Myers artist. You might have seen his work over his 30-year career, or perhaps watched his special on Amazon Prime titled Marcus Jansen, Examine and Report. But for those who haven't, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Marcus Jansen. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer. It's my pleasure.
Great. So for viewers who have not had the pleasure of seeing your work, just to provide a little background info, you paint these surreal landscapes and portraits that examine themes like conflict and casualties. And, I understand a lot of your work tends to touch on experiences that you've had growing up. And you were raised in the Bronx in the 1960s, which was a pretty tumultuous time. And then you moved to this small town in Germany. So these polar opposite experiences. And I would love to hear just more about, what from your memories and your time growing up really stuck with you that left an impact on you as an artist.
You mean in both places? Yeah, it's you couldn't be more paradox in terms of different places, right? I mean, my mother's side of the family is from Jamaica, so we immigrated to Jamaica in 1954. And this was when this huge wave of Jamaicans came into the United States. A lot of them migrated to the Bronx, and the Bronx was just one of those places where a lot of people, especially from the islands, came in. And we lived in an apartment building, fairly new apartment building that was built in 1964. This was a time when, King was shot in 68, which was only 2 months before I was born. And there was just a lot going on, generally speaking. Race relations were very difficult in New York City as well, even though people think that was sort of a multicultural pot. It was really, there was still very strong segregated areas and neighborhoods and so forth. And the Bronx was a forgotten neighborhood. So, keep in mind that was a neighborhood that from the late 60s on down into the 70s really went down economically speaking. I mean, there was, the city was bankrupt or almost bankrupt, and there was a lot of other things going on at that time. So those were my roots, but my best memories are probably just family. I was around a lot of family, very multicultural family. So, I always thought of my family as sort of the United Nations, being from the Caribbean. And yeah, it was an interesting experience until I went to Germany. Of course, I had a stint in Queens, New York before that. Going to Germany was all very opposite. I think the initial sort of impression was very, very different in nature. I was perceived differently. Obviously, I looked different, right? So this was, I came into a place that was all German, and the kids were all German. So, they looked at me different. And that was the first time I really saw myself as different, right? I never had that experience before. And that was difficult. So a lot of discrimination and racism, and also being jumped, and the N-word became my sort of middle name. So it was very difficult to navigate that system at that time. But on the other hand, it was also, sort of an opening to a new world in terms of culturally, language, and so forth. So I think my art turned out to be sort of this combination of these two worlds in many ways.
So as an adult, before you were an artist, you were in the Army for 8 years and you served in the Gulf War. Thank you so much for your service, first of all. And you have shared that, after that experience, you suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. And so as a form of therapy to help you with this, you picked up art. And so clearly there's got to be something that was so cathartic here for you. I would love to hear more about that moment, and what was it about art that helped you heal?
Yeah, I came back, art was always in my life, obviously, from very little on. As I mentioned before, in Queens, I had this competition that I won when I started school, and I had a painting that was hung in the Lever House at that time, which was interesting because, it sort of made me realize you could actually have something, a piece of art, and show it, and people would come to it. So I had a very early realization that was something you could use instead of just sort of doodling on a piece of paper and using as an outlet, but it could also be used as a voice, and it could be shown, right? So in the military, when I came back from the Gulf War in 1991, we got back in April. I was still Fort Bragg, North Carolina for about a year before I got sent to Korea at the DMZ for a second assignment. And I was the 2nd Infantry there at the DMZ. And it was there when I started having difficulties because it was a very isolated camp. And it was, it was very difficult to get off post. So you had to sort of put in these passes to get off post. And I think it was that isolation that in part also had me just had a lot of time to think about what happened in the Gulf War and my situation there and how I wound up there and all these other things that happened. And so when I came back after that year tour, I went to Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and as Aberdeen Proving Grounds, I started a Gulf War therapy program at Walter Reed. And Walter Reed had these programs for Gulf War veterans at the time, and it was really great because you could, the veterans could go in and we were examined on neurological things, but also psychological. But part of that program was art therapy, and art therapy was great for me since I was, an artist by heart. I was able to go in and paint and draw and things. Not, some of the soldiers didn't do too well with it because it just really didn't have that. And they thought, well, what the hell am I doing here? But for me, it was great because it was, I realized also it was an outlet and it was something that I could use for therapy. And I guess the people that worked there also noticed it. And, and I don't know what happened to those paintings and those drawings actually, but, it was just a time where it was a realization that it dawned on me that's something I could possibly do even for a living at some point, or maybe even, get into as a hobby more. But I still had a couple of years in service. So I was still in for about, I think, 3 years after that. And, but that was the key moment that I had that realization that art could be also not only therapy, but also something that you do as a profession.
Well, I would love to see some of those originals. You have to dig them up and find them somewhere. You mentioned how, art was also a way to use your voice, and your work has this undercurrent that examines these various power structures and casualties of war. You made a faceless series of portraits, and that's, really a nod to anonymity and secrecy throughout history. Tell me more about these topics that you're portraying and the perspective you're bringing to this work.
Yeah, these are the series that you mentioned, the Faces series. I started in 2011, and I was investigating power structures. And as you said, I mean, power structures has always been sort of a battle in my life. From really the minute I encountered power structures, which was from a very early age. So I guess if I had to draw it back to something that triggered those ideas, it would have to probably go back to childhood. But then again, in the military, you also have these power structures, and politically, you have these power structures. So I started examining power structures as whether it was psychological, military, or economic power structures that are always around us, obviously, and in part why we have a conflict today with so many different things, not just here in the United States, but globally. And I thought the best way to do it was with these faceless characters and what is power and where does power reside? Does it reside with an accumulation of people uniting, or does it reside with these secret characters that are anonymous that you don't really see, but that can also implement power, right? So there's there was this question of where does power really lie, and who are the powerful really? And so I really got into the series, but that really led me all the way. I started with these guys in suits, these faceless individuals in suits, and it went all the way to these colonial figures, so now there's a big topic also about colonialism at large, especially Western colonialism, and how we got to this point in terms of how power was inflicted without, in particular, minority groups, women, and especially African Americans being involved in those decision making. So a lot of the latest works have to do with this sort of examination of Western colonialism, not just, from a Confederacy standpoint, but from a larger standpoint of how did we really get these ideologies in place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's neat to note that, you know, as serious as your art themes are, there's still this kind of amusing, approachable energy about your work. And I feel like it comes from, you know, the color palette and this incredible brush stroke you use. And I pick up all these different styles. I get a sense of graffiti, but also maybe like some Keith Haring whimsy in there as well. Tell me about your method for creating a painting. And I understand you're working with oil enamels.
Yeah, I did an apprenticeship as a house painter before I went to school. And that's probably when I met or when I got in touch with these oil enamels, right? Because you paint, you know, these house paints. And they stayed with me. So I use them a lot for many of the paintings, you know. Now, unlike others and in academia, they'll use different tube paints and so forth. But I find these really liquid and free in application. So I can thin them with you know, with turpentine, or I could use them thick. You know, I could really do whatever I want with them. There's a lot of freedom with them. I just have this, I guess, initial idea that it has to do with things that really affect me one way or another, whether it's political or social, or whether it's something that ties to my own background, or whether it's, you know, something from my own past. And I approach it critically. But you mentioned something about, you know, these colors and everything.
Mhm.
I think the colors are really something that comes from sort of the graffiti art scene in the 1980s, which I was introduced to in New York and in the 80s when I met Wes Rubenstein, or West One, who was one of the legendary initial graffiti writers out of the New York City, Manhattan scene. And I met him in 1986. And, you know, I learned what was going on in the subway scene, and these kids really out of, from where I was initially from, reacting to these, you know, the social elements around them and the things that were going on in time at that particular time.
Mhm.
And those colors were interesting to me because they had so much excitement, and they were sort of bubbly and childish at the same time. And I
Mhm.
tend to use similar colors to draw people into the work and keep some of that excitement. But yet you have this sort of raw, very serious topic. So it's something that draws people in, but yet, you know, you realize and all of a sudden, okay, it's not Mickey Mouse and sort of you know, a happy topic. Oftentimes it's a very serious, you know, serious analysis or questioning of something.
What do you hope viewers get out of your work?
You know, I hope they're arrested with work. I think that's the main thing that most artists really want is, you know, for people for an artwork to arrest them in that moment. You know, not something that you just walk by, but something that that touches you and that makes you contemplate, and not just about the work, but about yourself and our surroundings. And I hope they serve as a mirror of some sort. You know, everybody looking at it brings something else to the table, a different intellect, a different experience, and they're not dictatorial, so they don't tell you what to think. They're simply just, you know, provocations in a way, you know, to look at and sort of compare with what you know, or to want to know more. I think that would be great.
Last question. In honor of Black History Month, what do you feel your voice as an artist adds to the dialogue culturally?
Well, I hope my work adds to art history, you know, in one way or another. I mean, you know, that's what we try to do as artists, I guess, is we're not here to sort of repeat what was done, but to question what was done before, right? Um, Especially when it comes to history. Like I said, I think it's, you know, it's important that different point of views are seen. I mean, history is especially, you know, if you go to museums these days, it's largely from a Western European view. And this is now, you know, slowly changing, but I think it's important that in these stages, especially with the movements that have been going on, that minority voices, women voices, African-American voices, and people of color are more presented, because I mean, that in the end is what history is, right? Is that we have this sort of, you know, global representation of what history is, and not just a one-sided view.
Mhm. That's right. Well, you're definitely adding to that mixing pot and a wonderful voice. So thank you so much, Marcus. This is such a treat, and we wish you all the best for your next series, and can't wait to see what happens next for you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks for having me.
I'm Brian Gluckstein. I'm an interior designer based in Toronto, Canada. The one thing I really wanted to talk about was what is the role of an interior designer? There's a lot of confusion of what an interior designer is. An interior designer is quite different than a decorator. An interior designer has a very expansive role. So for us in the design firm, we are involved in the planning of the interior with the architect. And by that I mean we're laying out the spaces, designing kitchens, designing bathrooms, designing doors and doorways and the trim and all those elements. Of course, we design furniture, we source furniture and fabrics and carpets and art and bring clients' collections together. That is all part of the environment. But the architecture and the architectural embellishment or simplicity of the architecture is sort of the foundation that we need to have to create a successful environment for that furniture and for that art. And one of the most important things in designing spaces as an interior designer is the sight lines. So if the environment allows it, I like to see the layering of the spaces. Often when people say, what does an interior designer bring to the table? There's a training that we have. There is a knowledge that we bring to the table. Whether it is the history of design, the history of furniture, the history of art, the history of architecture. Because when we bring that to a project, we are bringing to our clients something that they don't have the ability to do on their own. You know, you can go out and buy furniture, and that's part of what we do. We go to showrooms and buy things. But it's that layering of the architectural detail. And one of the things I did when I started out was I would be on construction sites and I would ask every trade how they did it, what they did, how they structured things, how the plumbing worked, how the lighting worked, how the wiring worked. Because now I am an active participant in the process with the architect and all those consultants. And I know when we're moving walls, what we can and cannot do because I come at it with an educated perspective. So we bring that value to the project, and that's what creates our successful and I think beautiful environments.
Hey design friends, this is your pal Cindy, and I wish I could be with you all today, but I did want to update you on our beloved NYC by Design Awards, so here we go. This year will be lucky number 7 as part of the 10th anniversary festival. Can't wait. You know, last year I hosted the award show all virtual, but it certainly didn't stop you from wanting to be included. And I have the numbers to prove it. There were 553 submissions. Wowza. I know. 177 projects were submitted and 376 products. And you know, the winning project shined oh so bright in all the boroughs. In Brooklyn, the Library of the Future is bringing the community together and teaching us all about sustainability. The Lower East Side's most historic indoor public market gives us the most diverse food experience and still supports small businesses. We love that. We also created a special outdoor dining category because the pandemic proved how we all pull together. Residential development is popping up everywhere, and you can still get your shopping on in Midtown. And we all can enjoy the entire city if you're not afraid of heights with The Edge in Hudson Yards. And product? Oh, well, there were oodles. Now, the new jury is being put together as we speak. Oh, and guess who's coming back? The award that everyone covets. Yes, I'm talking about the Yadro Guest. Hooray! If you want to even think about winning, you got to enter. Submissions open Wednesday, February 2nd and close March 23rd. So, enter. And the best news of all, the awards will be live. And our new celebration location will be revealed shortly. So, even though the pandemic has been hard on all of us, I know, you just can't hold this glorious city back. And it's clear how much our industry loves New York and how design is bringing together all the boroughs and leading the way as we build a better future together. Love you guys.
Small town charm, delightful residents, and lush surroundings. Today we're headed to Burlingame, California, where we're going to meet the leader of a top producing team who is making magic happen for his clients. Let's go. For centuries, we have migrated from one place to another, driven by seasonal changes, climate change, or economic forces. Today, we are seeing human migration driven by innovation and technology. This new breed of nomads are seeking lifestyle and peace of mind. I'm your host, Julie Foppel, global founder of Realm, and I've spent my entire career in the luxury space. Together, we're going to examine the great lifestyle migration and the stewards of real estate that help facilitate a safe haven for these new residents. We are in the most dynamic housing market of all time. This is Location Luxe. So I am here in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, being joined by Alan Canas, who served the entire San Francisco Peninsula with his top producing team. Alan, it is so good to be with you today.
Julie, thank you so much for having me. This is going to be so much fun to do. I cannot wait.
You know, I have to say, you are leaving some really big shoes to fill because you were the host, of course, for Location Luxe for season 1, and now I am kind of your protege.
Well, and you know what? You are going to be terrific.
Let's talk a little bit about kind of how you came to real estate.
I started out, through college, I was a general ledger accountant. And then from there, I was in healthcare at a top tier level. And then a friend of mine approached me and we started a company called Beyond Gourmet. And BeyondGourmet.com, we sold in, late 2006. And friends and family and my partner, who is my husband, we've been together for 21 years, said to me, we had bought and purchased a few homes, and he said, Alan, you need to be a real estate agent. And I said, there is no way I'm going to be a realtor. No way. And he said, if the people that we use could do it, you could do it so much better. And I took 6 months off and got my license, and boom, I became a realtor, and I loved it. I went from one cubicle to 2 cubicles to 3 cubicles, taking over a small private office, a large private office, building a team. And you know what, Julie, I found my calling. I love real estate.
I think it's so important to love what you do. You know, real estate it's insidious, right? It gets into every aspect of our lives. And so, having that joy with your career, that translates into your home life as well. And I know you have the most remarkable daughter, Casey. And tell me how being a dad kind of helps you in your real estate career.
I was so lucky to grow up in the Bay Area. Our area is home to some of the largest tech giants, as well as the wine country, and we have world-class skiing and charming coastal communities. And I am so grateful again to be able to share that with my daughter.
Well, it's wonderful. It's, and I think that you bring that gratitude then to your clients and to, as they're writing their stories in your community. Tell me a little bit about what is drawing people in, especially kind of as we're coming out of COVID, what is really driving your market and demand there?
For us, it's the interest rates. We have such low interest rates right now. I call it free money, because anything under 6% is really free money. And right now our interest rates are at, it's around 3%. So I'm calling it ultra free money. And that's really what's driving our market here right now. It's booming.
When somebody moves to the San Francisco Peninsula, what can they expect in terms of lifestyle, and how do you kind of get them ready?
What's important to me is family, culture, and a lot of us are not from here. We're from other areas of the world. And so for me, it's the restaurants. It's the mom and pop restaurants, the El Salvadorian, the Peruvian, the Italian, the Chinese, and those are just to name a few. And what most people don't realize is all along the Peninsula, Silicon Valley, Bay Area, they were given grants to build up their downtowns. With those downtowns come street fairs, come wine festivals. Again, something for everybody. And through the heart is food.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's getting to be lunchtime here, so you're speaking to the choir. Tell me a little bit about what's happening in the market. You know, are you seeing people that are buying and building? Are they buying older properties? Give me a feel for what the market looks like overall.
Sellers are wanting to get the most that they can out of a property. So what they're doing is that they are putting little money in and gaining as much as they can. At the same time, what's happening is you're seeing a lot of trustee sales, and that's because maybe the sellers had aging parents that didn't want to pay on the capital gains. We're also seeing a lot of 1031 exchanges. It's very interesting, the turnover that we're seeing right now. We are landlocked, so we're not seeing a lot of new builds, and that's a little unfortunate. We're just not seeing a lot of new properties right now.
Do you think that that's a trend that will continue?
I think what we're seeing right now is that is the future. But what I think people are gravitating towards, I have some properties that are coming up. It's a family estate where back in the 30s, grandma and grandpa bought one property, they built a second, and then they bought the one next door, and then they bought the one next door to that. So they had 4 properties all together. Well, the estate held on to them all, and now they're just selling them. That is a huge bonus for a buyer. And because that's a need. People want to get back together. They want that family connection again.
You make such a great point, Alan. I mean, especially, when you look at kind of post-quarantine and this new way of living, people want more, more togetherness, more compound kind of living. What other trends are you seeing within your marketplace?
The trends are interesting here. What we're seeing is that people are leaving. They are leaving in droves, but we also have people coming in droves. I mean, we are the San Francisco Bay Area. We're one of the most popular places to live. And it's the housing pricing is going up. It is a boom here. We are seeing anywhere between 3 and 12 offers on each property, depending on how it's priced.
Oh my gosh.
It's crazy. And again, that's interest rate driven. I don't see that changing in the next 12 to 24 months because, again, anything under 6% is free money, and we're at 3% for jumbo loans. And the economy cannot sustain if we go skyrocket at 4, 5, or 6%. Changing in the interest rates. And so what it does, though, it affords people to be able to buy in this area because our pricing is so high. And so that's what makes it affordable here.
So you've got incredible lifestyle, incredible amenities to the communities, wonderful, wonderful sidewalks and kind of this small town feel. Where are your feeder markets? Where are people moving in from?
People think that because people are moving out of the Bay Area, that we don't have people coming back to the Bay Area. We have people moving from all over the world when they can. We have the tech world here. We have the medical world here. So people are moving from Asia. We have people moving from New York. We have people moving from Chicago. I have people moving from San Francisco to the peninsula. We have one of the most strongest economies here on the peninsula, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, in the world.
I love that. And it's, like you said, it's also just the technology hub and all of those great minds. I mean, I think, you were absolutely one of the great marketing minds through COVID and kind of really leaning in to getting some positive messaging out. I was always so impressed with kind of how you did that. Have you always been an innovator? And do you think it's because you live in such an innovative community?
Yes. I've always been to exceed and to excel. And it's been the same in real estate. And for my clients, it's always to get the most for them and always the most for myself. And I've always been driven that way. It's how I'm structured. I have never been set out to just sit and do nothing. So when the pandemic hit, it was, how are we going to strive and assist our clients through this? And how are we going to assist our team through this? And how are we going to maneuver through this? Not just for us, but also for our clients. And our clients are the ones that really benefited.
It's so true. I mean, especially as you tell the story of your market and of your individual listings. And I mean, I know your team names all of your listings, which is so cool. You know, I mean, I just think that's such a neat little nuance, but it's also, you know, really how far and wide you broadcast, you know, to all these different markets and really tell that story that then helps drive that demand right back.
We name every single house, and we tell clients this is because buyers want a story. So like the Little White House, we named it the Little White House. And all through escrow, they called it the Little White House. Even the buyer's agent called it the Little White House. And so then we take things a little step further. So for instance, on Thursday, we walk everybody through our listings with cocktails, and we do Thirsty Thursdays and walk them through the house.
I think it's so fabulous. And you know, I mean, it's so impressive because we started out this interview and we talked about, you know, kind of the memories that you're creating with your family there and how you want to honor those. And now we're talking about kind of writing the next chapter of people's stories, you know, and doing that in a way that is so innovative and yet so comforting and comfortable. Alan Canas, I think you're incredible. And I'm so grateful that you joined me today on Location Luxe. I mean, I want to continue to learn from you for a very long time.
Oh, Julie, you are wonderful. I'm the one that's learning from you.
Thank you, and I can't wait to chat with you more.
Well, you know what? Come on over. It's a little bit warmer here. I'm looking for a new teammate.
Oh my gosh. Take care, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Julie. Much love.
Hey everybody, this is Cindy Allen, and this is another episode of At Home. Now, as an architect, you can't get more personal than building your own home. Today, we're so lucky we're traveling out west to visit my dear friend and Hall of Famer, Clive Wilkinson, who did just that. And not only built a modern home that is winning all sorts of awards, he also created a gorgeous, loving home for his wonderful blended family. And I'm so happy to get the tour. Hi, Clive, how are you?
Hi, Cindy. What a thrill to be on this, and kind of a privilege to be talking about one's own home.
I know. It's a hard thing to do, right? To design your own home?
I think it's the architect's nightmare,
Yeah.
mainly because they have so many ideas and they can't figure out a way of stuffing all of those ideas into this ideal conception of a home.
Right.
And they tend to find that they've got a sort of, God, they used to have this expression in England, a dog's breakfast as a result. Everything is kind of in the pot, and it simply doesn't work. So editing and being clear about what you're trying to do is the biggest challenge, and what you leave out and what you prioritize.
Right, what you leave out is almost as important as what you put in, right?
It is.
Yeah. But you've had practice because you've designed another home before, right? Did that help you in sort of really thinking about how to, I mean, this house is so special. Was the first go around kind of a good practice run?
It was. When I started the first one, of course, I had the existential crisis, which I think every designer has, with a sort of mental block about how to approach something that you want to put all your ideas into, and you can't. But I made it easy that time by saying, what would someone very pragmatic do to just simply exploit the best potential out of the site and configure a house, not necessarily for myself, but the best use of that site, and really depersonalized it. And that worked, but then I found I had depersonalized it a tiny bit too much.
Well, you learned, lesson learned, right?
Lesson learned. So
right.
I decided the next time around I wasn't going to be quite so kind of ascetic in what I was doing. And then I just had a miracle of a opportunity with the site that's on a hill right in the middle of Los Angeles, 2 minutes off the freeway, super convenient to the beach, to downtown, to everything. And it's about 7 floors above the street below. So it's just, nothing could ever block its view. So that was just a kind of a mind-blowing thing. And it also happened to be the first site I saw. So luck suddenly sort of, converged. And
well, there's a lot of good energy around you these days, and we'll get to that. But for others, do you think that, because I know the site was something that became very special because it was so steep, and yes, maybe that is hard for some people to imagine, but not you, right?
Well, I actually think that probably people who are familiar with building in the hills in a town like Los Angeles, have enough cues around them. And of course, there's some fabulous John Lautner houses and things like that, that are really dreamlike responses to building on a hill. The problem, of course, for an architect like me was, how far is the budget going to stretch? Because building in a hill isn't inexpensive. And then how do you just optimize the window that the city is allowing you to build within, and all of those sorts of things. So it ended up by being 3 levels stacked up. And an early decision was wanting to live on the top of the house. Right. Because that's where all the views, the most spectacular views were.
Exactly.
And that seemed like also you could live in the roof, you could kind of use the roof. And so I made the lower 2 floors bedrooms, and then, because we've got 5 bedrooms, sizable little family. And then the top space became the big sort of gesture. And as soon as I proposed this, a couple of realtors looked at this and said, "Oh, this is ridiculous. This would never sell to anyone. You've got to have your living in the middle when it's straight off the street, and bedrooms on top."
And it's the upside down house, right? It's the upside down house. Their old vision of what that is, right?
Yes. And so I was maybe worried for about 2 minutes, and then carried on. And it has proved its worth, because we've got the kids in the basement, and we can live up on the top floor, especially for work, and we don't hear them. And they, even though they're screaming and fighting and killing each other, it just removed enough.
Right. So let's talk about let's go into the house. Let's act like we're doing a tour. So you walk into the house. Do you see the staircase? The staircase runs through the center of the house, right?
Yes. We've got a front courtyard, sort of concrete, a lot of concrete walls.
Right.
And you enter through a big pivoting wood gate, and you come into the front courtyard, and from there you can see right through to the view, because we carved away from the house so that you would have that experience when you walked in. And then we put the stair smack in the middle, because as you go into the house, you want to sort of just flow straight up to that viewpoint, which you do going up the stair, and you arrive and you're right in the middle of this view. And you can, to your left, you can see downtown. To the right, you can see the ocean. You can see Catalina Island in the distance.
Wow.
On a clear day. So it's amazing. It's like a sort of gift every day.
Yeah, I thought I read somewhere that until you really cleared the site, you actually didn't know how good this was.
Oh yes, the site was a total jungle. I mean, it was really a jungle. It was so dilapidated, it was completely overgrown. You would need a machete to get through it. and very curious sort of old family that sold me the place. Actually, after we were in escrow, I once came across a group of them digging a hole in the garden. And
what were they doing?
Well, we know they were looking for treasure.
Yeah, they were looking. I thought maybe they were digging out their treasure, their last treasure.
They were looking for treasure, and they were very embarrassed because they weren't meant to be there.
Oh my God.
So I think there's some stories in this location which maybe one day we'll find out.
I love that. I would think I would think the opposite. They're digging and putting a treat in for you to find in 30 years.
Well,
that would be nice.
They had to use machetes to get to even get to the spot that they were digging. It was really crazy. Anyway, so we cleared away the site, and then we were flabbergasted with this view, and the design process actually went fairly quickly because it all just had to be very logical about how you use the site. It was a little bit like designing in a ship because we had severe constraints with setbacks and everything like that. And we had to make every square inch work. And then the top floor became this sort of great way of just exploiting construction. It's all natural construction and exposed, but we made that space more dynamic by shifting the sort of apex of the gable roof at 45 degrees, and that just transformed this into something very dynamic and sculptural. But it also made it easy for the builders to build because they just had a pitched roof that happened to be at an angle. So a lot of the things we were able to use, pretty basic. We didn't have to use very skilled craftsmen or anything like that.
But that angle is really stunning. It does look, I always think of it like when I first saw it, I'm like, yes, it looks like a sculpture. But then it's very crisp at the same time, right? It's like
very simple, yeah.
Yeah, very so beautiful. So wait a minute, when you got to that form, and you're in your office and you get to this form, you're like, I have something, right? Is that what's going through your mind?
Yes, I mean, we did little physical models, little paper models, and we tried it, honestly, we tried it sort of every different angle. And we ended up this one because it also was able to be rationalized structurally very, very simply as well. So it's like, okay, this just design sort of drops into its kind of, its final self at a certain point, and you just have to see that and run with it then.
And how did you decide on the materiality of what you would use?
Again, very basic construction materials. It's Douglas fir is the common wood that we use out here. I knew that we would have a difference between the construction wood used on the roof and then the slightly better carpenter applied wood on the walls, and that we'd end up with two different lots of Douglas fir, and there could be differences. So we had a plan to just sandblast the lot. And when you sandblast wood together like that, it just naturally starts to blend. And there's no sealer or varnish or anything like that on it at all.
But it's also it's concrete on the outside, correct?
Mixture.
Or some of it is.
Yeah, the lower areas are concrete, a lot of concrete. And then this whole upper floor is clad in black zinc.
I love that, yeah.
And the black zinc just sort of wraps the whole thing. And it's an extraordinary material because it self-heals. If it gets a little scratch or something like that, it'll start closing it up over time. Wow.
Have you used that before?
Not at this scale. So really, it's very long term. It's a 50 to 100 year material.
That's amazing. I had no idea it self-healed. And I wonder, like, do you ever want it to look a little old? I guess not.
Oh, there will always be the marks of construction that you can't ignore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so the bedrooms are downstairs, and then the middle, so the second level is the master bedroom, right?
Master bedroom, and that carve away for the view, the sort of patio at the second floor, a guest room, and the garage to the street. Yeah.
And then you head up, and you change this beautiful sort of grill work on the stairs heading up, right?
Yes, that's sort of, we use quite a lot of black steel. And so this was a moment of saying that it'd be so nice to have light being filtered through the screen. And also it gives us a little, I hadn't mentioned that there's a public walkway down that open side of the house. So
wow.
kind of the house genuflects to the public walkway, and that's part of that gesture. But it also means the glass around there also means that you're a little more exposed. So we wanted to have a little bit more shielding. So when you come down the stairs, you're not easily on view to the public. So we developed a design and used an algorithmic pattern to kind of shape that. And that it's all V, based on V's and K's. And those relate very directly to the V brace that's on the outside. So they're all the same angles repeated. And the same angles are repeated in the guardrail supports, which also are shaped like that.
That's beautiful. Yeah, you know, the thing about you, Clive, is that the architecture is always really, really strong, but there's an exuberance to things that you do. Even if it's like you said, it's very methodical, it's very planned, but those moments are so beautiful, and that black and steel grill work is gorgeous.
Oh, you're so sweet. That was fun. That was really fun. And also, you got to know when to stop with something like that. So it only really happens at that moment.
Right, and like behind you. So we have a black and steel moment behind you with all the bookcases, but also what you're sitting on. Like, you know, you said, like, I'm fearless. I love it. That's what it is.
Great.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Great Maharam fabric.
We love Maharam. So I want to know, so is that the media room, which is actually at the front of the house with the huge glass?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll actually do a rotation of the laptop. So
yeah, let's see. Let's
have a look. So the street is out there. The lower part is actually a haze on the glass for privacy reasons. And you can see up to the top there, and then going all the way around, you can see the library on the other side.
Yes, yes.
I wonder if I can just keep going.
Yeah, just keep going. You might as well.
Oh, sorry, it's a little bit, little rocky.
Yeah, just come back to me. Yeah, no, it's fantastic. So it's interesting because it looks like, first of all, that's such a huge expanse from the street. But it's the back of the house where you get the completely glorious view, right? And you're on that floor. So you're on the living room floor right now, right?
Yes, absolutely. But what's also gorgeous is the sun's, it's a south-facing house, but the sun creeps all the way around, and it comes in every evening in these windows right here. So we get this kind of beautiful blast of sunlight around sort of 6, 7 o'clock.
That's amazing. So how has it been being in the middle, having the kids at the bottom, and having this amazing living kitchen expanse upstairs?
It's fantastic. And one of the reasons, you know, as I said earlier, the separation of 3 floors makes the appalling noise of the children really sort of suppressed. And then, of course, when they are upstairs here, and it sometimes does get riotous, sometimes that's great in small doses. And then sometimes we just say, you have to go downstairs.
Right.
And they get banished. And you know, so we have volume control.
Yeah, you do. I love that.
But we have it's a house with volume control.
I love that. I love it. So let's back up a little just to tell everybody. So how long ago did you get married to the wonderful, beautiful, lovely Elizabeth? How long has it been now?
Gosh, it's almost 2 years ago. And we've been together almost 4 years. But I got the house just before, and in fact designed it just before meeting her. So it was in construction.
It was in construction. Uh-huh. And so, but you were blending this family that was going to move into this house.
Yes. I've got 2 of my own children, and then so there were 2 rooms for those 2. And then, suddenly I had a relationship with a fabulous Elizabeth and adorable Chloe, our 14-year-old, my 14-year-old stepdaughter now.
Right.
And just fortunately, the house was able to take all 3 bedrooms. I had this sort of spare bedroom on the bottom floor. Maybe it was in anticipation somehow.
Totally. Wait, what are your kids' names? Let's make sure we give everyone their due.
Mine is Hayden, who is turning 10, and Kiki, who is 8, and then there's Chloe, who's 14.
Fantastic. No, that's wonderful. So how exciting was that for the whole family to move into this new house?
Very exciting, although of course it was, we went through the same thing that everyone goes through with the house, which is, are we going to be ready in October? Are we going to be ready in November? Are we going to be ready in December? And of course, when we actually moved in, we had no hot water. We had no gas for cooking. And we had to have cold showers for about 6 weeks, and it was winter.
Oh my goodness. So that was fun.
It kind of put a little bit of a damper on moving in.
Yeah. On the whole vision of swooping up your wife and crossing the threshold, right?
Right.
Right. So what were some of the, you're building this house. What were some of the difficult, difficult moments or lessons learned in building this house?
Well, we had a couple of terrible contractors, not the main contractor, but 2 subcontractors, one, the concrete one and the steel one, 2 of the most important.
Right, of course.
And so we had a lot of problems with concrete and had to have walls literally pulled down and redone. And then we had mind-boggling issues of steel coordination, which I've never experienced in my life. Steel, I've always regarded steel as one of these great trades that has very tight tolerances. It's kind of an 1/8 of an inch, maybe 1/4 of an inch tolerance. We had a column put in that was 4 feet out of place.
Oh my God. I'm sorry.
We had the errors were just, they were just mind-boggling. I was wondering how these people could be in the trade.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway,
I'm so sorry. Well, you can't tell now, and it looks perfect, or as perfect as you want it to be. Let's talk about some of the furnishings, which are really beautiful and eclectic. And you've always had an amazing hand for that, even in all of the commercial work that you do.
Oh, thank you. Well, we were able to reuse more than I expected. This is actually a reclad.
Love that.
A Dutch Montes sofa from the first house.
Love that.
Yeah, a couple of these were reclad, and so a fair bit of recycled furniture. And then we got some nice Casina sofas, Pura Lusoni, also a couple of Pura Lusoni rotating armchairs. And
he's a master. He's a master.
Wow. Yeah. And then we actually had a day bed from the old house, which was also Pura Lusoni, that just happened to blend perfectly in the master bedroom. The gray and white sort of textured fabric went exactly with the concrete behind it.
Love that.
So serendipitous things happened. In fact, the orange things in this room, there are quite a few orange things in this room, which were part of the past, just happened to work here as well. And then, of course, I had my dad's handmade dining table, which is made of ironwood, which he made at age 90.
Oh, really? It's beautiful, and I love the eclectic mix of the chairs around the table.
Yeah, well, there's another nice story there. There's only 2 upholstered chairs around the table, and the children are not allowed to sit in those. We were going to get a couple more upholstered chairs, and then we realized that they would have massive stains in no time. So there's a lot of practical, Eames plywood and Panton chairs and things like that.
Fantastic. Hey, kids, you're getting a bad rap here. Wait, I want to talk about the bathroom. It's stunning. And I think you had mentioned that you designed the bathroom around the tub.
Oh, yes. We found a perfect tub. So hard to find the right tub, and of course it has to do with the space, but also even more importantly it has to do with being a great tub to lie in. I've forgotten the name of that brand. It's an Italian tub, and now they've discontinued them. But yes, it had a black outside and a white inside, and so the black and white theme of the bathroom kind of evolved from there. And then we found these great, actually commune designed floor tiles, which are kind of
the cement tiles, right?
Charcoal. Yes, kind of Moroccan cement tiles.
Right.
And we paired that also with Bazaza mosaics for the shower. And then the sink area, we were able to get these great, I think they're agape, sort of flowing basins. So that was all a lot of fun. And then painted the carcass of the vanity black lacquer, so it kind of went with everything.
Gorgeous, gorgeous. I love the bathroom. It's so beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Of course, I have not been in the house yet, but one day I will. I'm on the wrong post. Yes. But I do see, Clive, you have a lot of your friends, our friends over. I saw Joey Shimoda there, and like everyone must be really excited and loving being in the house.
Oh, people are fabulous. Yes, we had a cocktail party in January before everything sort of went pear-shaped with COVID-19. And so many people, I think Edie Cohen was here. So many people came and yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, like what is that like with architect friends at architect friends' homes?
Oh, the questions.
Right.
And the jokes. It's all great.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. You know what I say about, my house here, which is also an upside down house.
I can't wait to see one day.
Yeah, you'll see one day. But that it's a happy house. Like, I think it's important to live in places where you feel loved and feel happy. And when I see this house, which is gorgeous and strong and architectural, but when I see you in there with your family, it feels very much like a happy house.
It is. I think that we always feel a sort of sense of privilege to be, and a sense of gratitude to be in a place that's really fundamentally lovely to be in, and we actually going through COVID-19, and we can't complain. Honestly, it's such a privilege. It has been obviously a brutal period for everyone, mostly because of personal relationships and challenges that business challenges and things like that. But we are extremely lucky to be living in this kind of living and working, adapting to working from home.
Right. It really feels like an oasis for you and your family. And how is the whole blended family thing going? You can tell me. Well,
I guess I complain about the sort of hooligan behavior, but they're most happy when they're hooligans. And you get to a point of, you go through admonishing them, and then you realize, but they're so enjoying this behavior. So why don't you shut up and just enjoy it too. So yeah, I think it's amazing. Chloe's the 14-year-old who is now also helping the younger ones with their schooling and kind of guiding them and things like that. And she's got over the completely natural initial sort of sort of awkwardness of a 14-year-old having to deal with these little kids,
right?
Which is completely natural, and she's adapted fantastically. She's an excellent older sister, and they're very grateful.
Yeah, of course. And Clive, I just would like to remind you that you can be extremely, it's what we love so much about, so exuberant and so full of life and so passionate and maybe even a little rowdy once in a while.
This is true. No, I've got to blame myself, absolutely. They might be taking after me, but part of educating them is to teach them not to take after me.
You take after the good parts, and well, first of all, how is the office doing? How are you guys managing? Have any projects opened up?
We yes, one very nice one has just opened up for a cannabis company. I think this industry is growing in leaps and bounds, and in fact the COVID-19 is actually in their favor. So yes, this is a company of about 5,000 people who need offices all over the world, and so we're working on a whole new concept for that. And that's
fantastic news, Clive, huh?
Yeah, oh my God, it's such a relief. Yes.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
Thanks.
It's like, I wonder what we'll say in years from now, looking back, what we learned, but certainly when something like that comes through, you have to really count your blessings, that's for sure. Yes,
we also have a wonderful project with Lululemon doing their headquarters in Vancouver. So those two in particular are, and we're converting a Lautner house as well, John Lautner.
You are?
We are, for a wonderful client, and that's academically fascinating.
Like, I could see this house as being one in 50 years. We look back at that house and say that represented, you know, a modernist house of its time, and it's going to last forever, kind of thing.
Oh, that's very sweet of you. I think the fundamentals of the house are of its time. It's very simple in using the way it uses concrete, the way it uses steel and glass. It's rational and simple, and then it does celebrate its living areas, which are, I mean, I think these are all very appropriate and classic concerns in creating a house. So it's not frivolous in any sort of shape or form, but at the same time, it does manage to be expressive about. I think it expresses the right things. In other words,
right. It certainly does. It's like you said, it's like really honest materials, and ones that are going to look great for a long time. Especially that roof, especially the blackened. What did you say that heals itself?
Black zinc.
The black zinc. God, that's fantastic.
It's great. It's a Swiss material. Yeah, it's lovely.
Amazing. Well, listen, I wish you all the love and happiness. Send big love and hugs to Elizabeth, and I can't wait to get the tour in real life, in real time, and get one of your Clive Wilkinson hugs. But meanwhile, this will be okay too.
Oh, thank you so much, Cindy. Love you too.
Sending you lots and lots of love, okay?
Bye.
Okay.
The topic, I think, is a really, really good one. And it's the question of, can the workplace cure burnout? And it's hosted by HKS, and we have a great panel, which I'll introduce in a second. But I think essentially the burnout is not a new phenomenon, but certainly COVID and everything that's gone on around COVID has made it worse for all of us. Obviously, one of the main causes is workload, but there's so many other causes which we're going to get into. And also, we want to look at, can workplaces themselves, which are often a cause of burnout, can they be actually a component of healing and of recovery from burnout? So we're looking at integrating senses of purpose and health and well-being, measuring impacts, designing spaces that users have better control over, and so many more ways that we can possibly address burnout. So our panelists, I'll first introduce Upali Nanda, who is HKS Principal and Director of Research. Upali is going to do a first for us on Think Tank, which is a little presentation just to get you more familiar with this topic and visually get you a little bit more in the mindset of what we're doing. So Upali, I'll let you start off.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much, Sam. And I would say this is less presentation and more catalyst, if you will. Can everyone see my screen? So the prompt is a really interesting one. Can the workplace cure burnout? And why we are here today is to have a conversation about it, because no one is in any doubt that the nature of work, the nature and role of workplace has fundamentally shifted. To what? We don't quite know yet. We also do know that burnout is rampant. Our own data, we started doing surveys right when the pandemic hit, like in March 2020 was our first survey with our staff. Until date, we've done almost 20 of those. And we've seen this shift that work, quality of work, productivity of work has not changed. but more employees have reported having at least one symptom of burnout in 2021 compared to 2020. This is not unlike, this data from our research is not unlike what we are seeing globally or nationally. We're also seeing that it is not equitable. We see that more women, for example, report feeling burnout compared to men, and the gap seems to be increasing. There are burdens at work and home that nothing fell off our plate, more came on. And somehow all the time that we regained, supposedly we gave it all back to work. So it's a very interesting shift in our times. We're also seeing from, again, our own research in this case, that connecting socially to coworkers is correlated to an increase in happiness. So burnout's increasing, productivity is not changing, and the relationship between happiness and social connection is emerging. And again, all of this data that we are mining, we're still kind of working through. The piece that we've eventually realized is that after millennia of evolution, of doing things a certain way, and then of offices and doing things for certain decades, now in the last 2 years, we have suddenly shifted foundationally. But our fundamental Lego block, the human brain, the Lego of experience, that hasn't evolved as quickly as our lives have. So we've kind of embraced this experiment and gone back to thinking about what it means to our most precious asset, the human brain. And that's why I'm so excited about the panel and about the conversations that we're having and this link between the brain and building we will explore today. The questions we're asking is really this what if point that we're in right now, right? Like what happens when we separate work and place? What does that mean? Because we did, right? But not for everyone, right? So there are still place-based workers. There are still people who don't have this option of working from anywhere. And what does it mean for them? There's really interesting research that's coming out on equity gaps that are between anchored workers and workers who have great amount of flexibility. That's another layer we haven't unpacked. What happens when we blur boundaries between work and life? What's the cost of that? We don't really know. What happens when we navigate the digital and physical environments in unprecedented ways? We have never done this at this scale for this long. And what happens in all of this when we don't measure what matters, when our life and the fundamental Lego blocks of how we are living and working have changed, but we are still using measures of old. So these are some of these fundamental questions or catalysts that we wanted to kick off this conversation with. And when you'll see the panel, you'll understand why we think it's such a privilege to have a part in this conversation. So with that, I'll give it back to you, Sam.
Well, thank you, Polly. That was really, really helpful way to start. I appreciate it. So let me introduce the rest of the panel. We also have Jennifer Kolstad, who's a Global Design Director for Ford Motor Company. Great to have you, Jennifer. And then we have Sandra, or Sandy, Bond Chapman, who's the founder and Chief Director at the Center for Brain Health. And we have Todd Brown, who is a architect and environmental psychologist. So that's a great lineup to discuss this important topic. As we were saying, Polly made a good point when we were meeting a little bit beforehand. I think this kind of discussion is essential right now because the pandemic, since it happened, and all the repercussions, we've basically been our own guinea pigs. I mean, we're basically learning things on the fly, and we're making up a new kind of reality in a way. Especially, I think the workplace is a great example of that. So these kinds of discussions are not just interesting; they're actually, I think, forming, what's next. So I think I'm really excited to have all of you on board. So let me and we'll start with questions for for everybody on the panel, but we're also going to look for questions coming from the audience. So if you have questions, as Tina mentioned, you can put them in the Q&A function, and we'll look for those as well. The first question I'm going to ask is for Jennifer. My question for you is, over at Ford, I think this is a great example, obviously a large workforce. Have you been seeing more burnout in your workforce, sort of in the wake of the pandemic and everything that's come with that? And if so, what are some of the causes that you're seeing for that?
Okay, that's a big open question. You're asking me about 200,000 people around the world.
Right, just a small question.
So out of the gate, I will just be very honest with you to level set and say, I obviously can't quantify burnout for 200,000 people, but I can tell you that we, from the onset of COVID, surveyed our non-place dependent employees quite regularly to ask how they were feeling, how they were coping, how their productivity was, things like that. And so I almost want to say, like, the data gathered from that it's no longer relevant, because we're in this phase of like wild experimentation where the data points are like shifting bi-weekly and monthly. But that's one way that we could get our hands around this kind of population segment. I will say, since the onset of COVID until now, we've kind of shifted focus, or rather broadened focus. So we care very deeply about the health and well-being of our employees, and have expanded to really think deep into the health and well-being of our place-dependent employees, because manufacturing represents a large segment of our population. So, we're applying the same type of focus, data gathering, and well principles to all of our space typologies now, as opposed to just focusing on those initial questions, which were burning around, what is the future of workplace? And I think that that's an important point to make, that burnout is affecting everybody in different ways uniquely. And our job right now is to better understand that.
And so as I said, we're all kind of learning on the fly, but have you been noticing that there are specific ways, and this is before the pandemic as well, although everything seems to be accentuated with the pandemic, but what are some of the ways? And again, it's a huge company, but I'm sure that you've had discussions about ways to sort of deal with that burnout, whether it's sort of working on workload management or through spatial design, or are there things that you're sort of looking into or have found that have any sort of impact on that?
The problem is complex, and it's not easily solved through tools or like what we name as tangible outcomes, design solutions. If I back up and look at the question asked of the whole panel, can the workplace cure burnout? My simple answer is no, it cannot, but culture can. And so our focus is probably more, even as a designer, more on changing cultural beliefs. So the belief system or the paradigms that wrap around work, how work is done, where it's done, what are measures of productivity, not on design yet. Even though we're designing projects today that are in flight and well underway, we're still kind of like resisting the temptation to come to conclusion on that, but instead focus on the policies.
Well, that's interesting. And I think that's a good point. Anytime we jump to any conclusion now is a really tricky thing, because it's a little early, and it's going to take us time to sort of figure out where we are and what's going on. Or is it, Apolly, as you put it, I like, where am I actually, is sort of the question of the day. So Apolly, that leads to a question of, because your firm has specifically been researching burnout and the causes of burnout. And so from your point of view, obviously, as Jennifer said, it's sort of early, but I'm assuming that it is starting to inform your design, whether that means biophilia, and you're saying creating community, creating calm spaces, diverse spaces, improving lighting. I'm sure there's a lot of techniques that can go into at least minimizing burnout and stress. So I'm wondering what goes into that study, and what are some of the ways that you found can improve that?
And some of this, Sam, I'm going to defer to when Sandy talks, because our research on burnout has been very much around self-reported burnout. Right?
Sure.
It's what our employees have said. And one of the key things we're doing is actually starting a partnership with the Center for Brain Health to look into it deeper. But to the point you're asking on what kind of strategies are you using, and I'll combine that with Jen, that suddenly what has happened is our design problem is no longer the design of space. Our design problem became bigger, and we're starting to talk about what kind of a workplace can truly support equitable presence between your digital and physical worlds, right? Like it's a very different question because we didn't have to think about it in those terms before. The comforts of home, like some of the things that we have found in our research, for example, is the importance of thresholds, separation. Even when you're working at home, the separation between where you work and where you do other things, and why that matters.
Especially at home.
Especially at home, especially if you're in an apartment and you don't have an office. And our work conditions at home are not equitable for everyone either. That was a big finding. So we're kind of learning that there is a lot that we need to unpack, that we can't do it in isolation with space. But within place, we're also realizing that there's a role that microenvironments play. Really understanding what is a microenvironment and how does it change when I go from one location to another location within what is turning out to be a work ecosystem. So it's not a workplace anymore, it's a work ecosystem. And that ecosystem has different points of entry into it. And the office is one point of entry. It is by no means the only point of entry. And what the role of the office is, and this feels, I can't say this is coming from the research, this is very much a personal opinion, but in some ways the narrative seems to be shifting where I might be going into work in order to have a life, because my life has just become all about work. So there are all these different conversations. To the question about burnout for those who are place-based, and I love that Jen brought that up too, that there is a role for the things we've studied and have an evidence base around, like biophilia, like light, and like air. Air has become so relevant in the last year or so. And these fundamental rights, like right to light, right to air, right to human connection, those should never have been put at premium, and they suddenly are. And I think that's a shift we are starting to see.
I think that's a really good point. It's one of those things that I think a lot of these problems existed, but the current situation has obviously magnified that, and just in the way that we're now living made it, that much more challenging. Sandra, I wanted to talk to you as well about, from the Center for Brain Health and what you're working on there. So what are, like, from a less a design methodology and more clinical methodology that you're coming up with to sort of deal with burnout? Because it's interesting to look at it from both perspectives.
Yes, thanks, Sam. So what I would say is, first of all, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist. So what I've been studying for the last 3 decades is, what is it that builds a healthier brain, a brain that can thrive? What kind of measures can we do to look at happiness, to look at purpose, to look at human-to-human connection, the importance of social emotional intelligence? And so we're trying to really flip the conversation. As you know, burnout has really, it's always been there a little bit, but nothing has accelerated it near like the pandemic has. And we didn't even have a code for it until recently. And what's happening is what our brain really hates is unpredictability. And for the last 2 years, we have been stuck in this state of unpredictability, and it causes fear in people. And that fear then leads to anxiety. And then when we get, so these are kind of the stages of burnout. And then when you get anxiety, what happens, and you can feel this everywhere, is social contagion. So it's like everyone, all of a sudden, burnout has become whoosh, it's covered the world because it's everywhere. You're seeing it in the newspapers, corporations are talking about it. So it's actually becoming, spreading faster than COVID with our social contagion. And when you get this kind of panic, then our brain paralyzes the frontal lobes that helps you to figure out, hey, brain, what are some things you can do not to burn out, but to really find ways to flourish, if you will. So at Brain Health, we truly are looking at a flourishing brain. We have, for the last 100 years, put the brain in a state of what's wrong with it. It's either fine until it's not. So we're really good at labeling. You're depressed, you're anxious, you've got social anxiety, your IQ isn't quite as good, but the brain really doesn't want to be labeled like that. And no one has really incorporated neuroplasticity, which, if you think about it, the greatest gift that we were ever given is this amazing brain inside our head that changes moment to moment by everything we do in good ways and bad ways. And so our goal is, how do we define brain health? How do we measure it? And we're looking at it from a holistic perspective. And so, working with Upali and different corporations, and some that we've already started working with some pilot studies, we've shown that individuals, when they learn how to use the apps in their brain, which is what I would say, it's like we built these fancy spaces. And for Jen, I would say it's like our Ford GT, the fancy supercar. But if you don't know how to use it, what good is it? Well, we actually don't know how to use our brain to thrive when the world sucks and when human connection has been separated. So we help people learn strategies to really embrace the potential of the human mind, which we haven't even begun to look into yet. And that's what we're all about, is figuring out how we can optimize and help people harness their limitless brain potential. And it's pretty exciting.
So that's really fascinating. And I some of these, concepts are, new to me. Social contagion, for one, I hadn't thought about it that way, but it makes a ton of sense. But also you mentioned, so you are working with companies like HKS. So what does that sort of connection look like when you're from a different side of examining things? How does that come together?
Yeah, so I've been a cognitive neuroscientist for the last 3 decades, but our chancellor said, Sandy, what you have done, whether it's Navy SEALs, special ops, CEOs, millennials, to increase peak performance, to make peak performance go way beyond 30, which is right now where our peak brain years are, how can you expand that to the world? So we launched about 2 years ago this Brain Health Project, and we're looking for different corporations to partner with. And in Upali, we've had a long relationship with HKS. They actually designed our first building, and we're so proud of it. But they've been partners for a long time to see what would a brain healthy workplace look like. We now know that productivity cannot be defined by GDP, bottom line money. It's really how well the people flourish. In fact, countries are reporting the higher their GDP is, it's not associated with higher happiness. In fact, our happiness is going lower and lower, even though salaries are going up. So we're partnering with corporations that are willing to take on this life experience to see, hey, can we help our people flourish from the get-go, and really think about how you use the apps in your brains, learning strategies to use this amazing engine. So combining place, because I do think the place is important in the design of it, but the human to human connection is probably one of the most important things that helps our brain to thrive And that's actually part of our holistic index. And I can talk more about that later. But yeah, we're working with different corporations. We'd love, different partnerships to think about what that would look like. And will people be into it? And we're interested in people realizing, maybe I like to work from home, but what if it's hurting my brain health index? What if I really need this human to human connection? And what if the productivity that I do at the office is very different? And so that's what we're going to be able to answer.
Right. That's really interesting. I feel like we're just on the tip of this. There's a long way to go. It's really interesting. And speaking of where we're going, Todd, I think it's fascinating that you are an expert in you're an architect, but you're also an environmental psychologist. So from your point of view, I am interested in kind of where the science of kind of well-being and architecture, kind of the merger of that how that's evolving and where that's going.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me? Okay, excellent. Yeah, I think that's an important yet broad question. I think for me, when we talk about the systematic investigation of architecture as it relates to well-being and how it's evolving and what's next, it really would be dependent on kind of which field or which academic or research area that we're talking about, right, in terms of investigating that issue. So for example, over the last 20 years, there's been like the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture, right, which is a separate organization, and they explore the intersection between architecture and cognitive and neuroscience as a way to improve design. Now, their research area primarily looks at elucidating the kind of structural and functional aspects of the brain and its biology in terms of a physical or biological process of architecture and other aspects of the built environment and spatially. And I think that there's a lot of value in that perspective. However, my area of research is environment. As an environmental psychologist, I'm primarily interested in the social science research around architecture, individuals, and social groups. And that is to say that I really love investigating the kind of critical psychosocial aspects of human environment relationships. So basically, research in my area really is more interested in looking at the subjective experiences of people in physical space and how architecture plays a role in the understanding of space, the self, and others, right? As well as that interaction between those kind of three components. But while doing that, I also center the very real and kind of ubiquitous power dynamics of social constructs such as race, class, gender, and even sexuality, understanding how all of those kind of identity categories play very tangible roles in the experience of a variety of environments, including workplace environments. So I feel that those themes are just as, if not more important for kind of critiquing the production of architecture and the production of the built environment, and kind of realizing the social and psychological impacts that physical space and certain environments have on communities, specifically marginalized and social groups. And then also, for example, there's the field of environmental and occupational health sciences, which I also have a background in. But to some degree, that field looks more at exploring different types of environments, particularly workplace environments, and the stressors associated with them, not only related to productivity, but also related to, for example, the resultant injuries and illnesses that can occur within occupational environments as a result. And these injuries and illnesses can be psychological or physiological. So I think that, for example, the next step, because all of the research from these areas are producing, we're producing very great research. I had been chatting with Sandy previously about her work, which I find is very fascinating. And we were talking about, wouldn't it be wonderful if, coming from these different spectrums, we start to combine our research? What about the research that's in cognitive neuroscience? What about the research that's in environmental psychology? The research that's in environmental and occupational health sciences? What about combining those so that they become this kind of a significant collaboration that uses these multiple lenses, that develops these kind of comprehensive models around architectural or spatial perception, experience, and well-being? I think that really is the next step, because research that starts to look at all of these different facets, I think can produce very powerful tools to both evaluate and create architectures in terms of their performance as supportive, restorative, and inclusive environments.
Right. Well, that's a really, really good point. And also a good point that the question was very purposefully broad, but I think you really kind of broke it down really well. But also the fact that what you were saying about the impact, the stressors that come to people are not uniform, which I think is a really, really good point. It's not like, well, when we're thinking about spatial stressors, okay, so light and environment and noise, it's like, no, there's social impacts, there's the impacts of who you are, sexually, racially, gender, everything that can, it's just so much more layered than we know, and it's really helpful to bring that perspective into that, so we can really kind of really think about what's going on. And I think yeah, this is a great panel, because I don't usually get this broad of a perspective from everybody. I really am excited about that. And we're going to do our own very unscientific question now, poll question about burnout. So Kelly, do you have that question? There we go. And there's a lot more than these, but we only had so many multiple choices to choose from. I think now that we've had this panel, I would have added a few more, but that's okay. Well, we'll let everybody answer that as we're going. And I don't know, Kelly, is that something we can share with people, or how does it work? Oh, here we go. Okay, that's interesting. So the amount of work is by far the most, which is not surprising to me. Second, though, lack of community is interesting, because we're talking about the social aspect of burnout and social aspect of just brain health, which is something that I don't think I realized it was that level of important. Certainly work, the amount of work is not surprising at all. Type of work also, I think that has to do with, fulfillment and to some degree, social, kind of our own wants socially. And then, so this is interesting and very unscientific, but very, very interesting to see what all of you are thinking. And along that vein, I'm going to take a couple of the questions from what you're all thinking from the Q&A here. And I think, when the panel, you don't all have to answer all of these, but maybe we'll have one or two of you answer some of these. One is, and I suspect I know the answer, or at least I have my own ideas, but does workplace burnout limit its view to the employee or include their near network? That includes families, close associations, and so on. And I guess if it does, which I suspect it does, how does it do that? So that's an interesting question. Does anybody want to take that one on?
Yeah, I'll take it on. I think it's interesting because people often, what we find is they claim that work is the reason they're burning out. And that's why we're getting this great resignation. And then they quit their jobs and then they find, whoa, I'm still not happy. So is it something that I've done? And so their family, they haven't really been thriving in their family. So there hasn't been really anything to do it. So the whole idea of what is burnout is really this sense of being completely overwhelmed emotionally, physically, being cynical about all things relationships. So we do see that our mindset, and it spreads to all of our different connections and networks, our friends, our families, or we don't want to be with our family anymore. And so it is definitely a fast spreading disease, which is why we need to flip the conversation to think about, yeah, I'm not feeling the sense of joy. What are some things each day? What can I do this very day to change this equation? And we see when people improve their work ability to see purpose in work, then guess what? Their family relationships get better. It's all of a sudden when you get a sense of purpose here in one place, then it also spreads upward. So it's, for us, what we're trying to do is really shift people to quit thinking it's all negative and bad, like we viewed the brain in this outdated way. And it's time to shift that. And it definitely spreads over to the rest of our network.
Right. And that's such a big impact. And I think the challenge, and this is something we, before the call, but before this event that I was talking about with a couple of you, is I think one of the challenges, I think we all see that it's vital to address well-being, mental health, sense of purpose, all these things. And in the long run, it has really positive results for the bottom line to a company. But right now, in a time when companies are sort of kind of scrambling and just wanting to get people into the office at all and just trying to kind of survive, that sort of gets lost in the shuffle. So how, either from a designer's point of view, how do you convince clients that this is actually really essential? Or from a neuroscience or psychological point of view, how do you convince people that this is something they need to focus on? Because it seems very easy for this to get lost as sort of, kind of secondary of importance.
I guess I can start to address that.
Sure.
I think, there are lots of great examples within corporate America where some of the major corporations have already started to understand the importance of addressing burnout within the actual workplace environment. So you think about companies like Cisco or Google or Zappos, right, where these companies are actually installing meditation rooms, napping pods, napping stations, kind of within the work, providing these literal physical spaces that are, part of creating restorative environments. I don't know how supportive per se, but definitely restorative at a basic end. I think that if you start to look at some of these Fortune 500 companies that have already recognized the utility in creating these types of spaces, and you look at employee feedback surveys, which most of these companies that do implement these types of policies, but also they're not just policies, they're spatial practices, right? They're actually creating the space that says they value the mental health, their psychosocial, emotional well-being of their employees. You see there's surveys, and at least from what they report, they have high levels of productivity and high levels of employee satisfaction. I think that if we can start to kind of emphasize that, and that they are working, at least to some extent, with some of these major corporations, that could start to be, in my opinion, influential to other major corporations, and of course, smaller businesses as well, to say, hey, look at what some of the big boys, so to speak, are doing, or big girls. I don't want to be gendered, but let's look at what some of the big players are doing in this field, and look how it's actually transforming the kind of occupational experience of their employees. So I think we have some good examples out there, and it would be great to see that to be widespread and not just in a niche, kind of small sector, usually within tech. But if we can see that kind of expand to a variety of different sectors within the work environment.
Yeah, I think case studies, and especially in the corporate world, everybody wants to see an example that this works before they're going to kind of take a risk on that. I think for sure. Polly, I wanted to ask you about, speaking of case studies, maybe you can even talk about one or two projects that really kind of you've already done, kind of dug into this, or any specific kind of types of strategies that you can point to that have been worked on so far.
And I'll follow that up, Sam. That I'll actually share that. I'll tag on to Todd's comment and take on your question, and maybe I'll hand it to Jen after that. One of the reasons that we spent a lot of time gathering data, but we are at a time of such great shift that a lot of the questions that we are asking have to be rethought. A lot of the metrics that we rely on have to be rethought, right? So in real estate, occupancy was one of the key metrics for utilization, and utilization was a key metric for productivity. All of those metrics have fundamental problems in them. So it feels like we're at this time where we have new questions, but we don't have new metrics to get to those questions. So I kind of wanted to say that the research we are doing, I fully agree. You have to get neuroscience, anthropology, behavioral psychology. You have to bring them together, because you run the risk that if you don't have a single lens, you may have a bias you're not even seeing. So you're bringing all of that together, but the solutions have not been tested yet. We're in the experiment in terms of testing out these solutions. We're prototyping and testing as we go. And so this idea of what we have done in terms of some specific strategies, I'll share an example with work we've done with Ford, if that's okay, Jen, is that in working with manufacturing workers, for example, our biggest aha moment as a research team was that we were taking a very Lululemon yoga mats approach to wellness that wasn't working for the stakeholders we were actually trying to design for. Okay? Wellness is now a $4.3 trillion industry, right? So that there's a business to wellness, but it's a deeply personal thing too, that we realized that we had to unpack very differently. In that particular context, for us, the biggest insight was it's the design of time that's the problem. It's not the design of space. For time-based workers, and I think all of us are starting to face this, that maybe the design problem of our times is time itself. And that is a very complicated problem. And how does space support that? How does space support culture? Also, that term that Sandy used about neurogenesis, that's a fundamental shift. Like, how do we start thinking about generating new connections rather than trying to be constantly restorative in the traditional sense? Because we're trying to fix a problem, but we have run the risk of fixing it an old way in a time where lots of things have changed. So I'm giving very broad answers because some of those things have not gone away, like light, biophilia, access to people, access to connection, agility. And now we're putting thresholds on the table as something new that we have to think about. Flexibility, agility, light, air, network connections, social connections, and then thresholds and boundaries, which is something new that we're realizing we've kind of lost. And there is a place for boundaries, and spaces need to provide diverse affordances, but they can't be just fluid. And we can't take any one-size-fits-all approach to design right now.
Right, and Sandy, I'll let you weigh in on this as well. Since we started talking about Ford, but I first want to ask Rupali, because I'm kind of fascinated when you're saying the design of time. I didn't quite know what you meant. Are you talking about the design of like how the work week kind of would go down, or what do you mean by that?
And I think Sandy might have thoughts on that too, because I'm looking forward to our brain training that will get us there. Yes, I think the design of our work week, the design of our meetings, the design of how we interact with each other, how much time do we give to things, and also for those who do shift-based work, circadian rhythms. If you're working in the night, what does it mean to your day? So there is that notion when we start living these 24/7 lives, and now in multiple medium, that there are things that we've kind of lost along the way that we're trying to get back. So circadian rhythms is at one end of the spectrum. The meeting overload is the other end of the spectrum, and we're trying to solve for both ends in some way.
Right. And I like, obviously thinking about the user. You don't necessarily want to have, all yoga rooms for auto workers, but you sort of that kind of thing. Yeah, I get that. That can be in it. You have to be very tailored to that. And one of the audience members mentioned a book. Tony Wire mentioned a book by Johan Hari called Stolen Focus, which says he's showing research showing that productivity actually increased between 30 to 40% when there was a 4-day work week. And also happiness increase. So that's interesting, interesting data there. And data is what I want to get to in a second, but I also want to ask Jen if you have more to weigh in on about sort of tailoring, these kinds of approaches, and what your thoughts are on sort of the design of time, the design of space, the design of corporate culture.
Well, I think it's interesting to explain what Rupali is getting at. in the context of the factory worker, because that's actually what we've been working on together, which is this future of manufacturing. And that issue is, from a people perspective, we're trying to get that at the heart of issues around absenteeism and retention. That's like a primary focus. We lose our staff a lot. Sometimes they don't come because it's not a nice place to be. So what we've effectively done is applied the same findings, outcome of workplace, future of workplace, which, for your information, landed on what we're calling a brain to building framework. It's a vetting mechanism. So we don't move forward and make design decisions without vetting on behalf of the individual, the group, or the culture. And then now we've applied that same mechanism or that same system to factory. The difference, though, between non-place dependent workers or knowledge workers and place dependent is what Upali is getting at here. It's time. Our day is different. And so we've got folks now who are totally dependent on breaks as a matter of access to health equity. And if we as Ford Motor Company say, okay, we believe in health equity universally, then we have to allow those folks the same degree of access. And so we've landed on something called the 90-second factory, which is that anywhere that you are online in factory, within 90 seconds or less, you have access to health equity, to wellness conditions. And those aren't things like yoga mats and whatever we were just talking about. That is a cognitive reset. So really digging deep into what eustress is, peaks and valleys, and how we reset. Our provisions are nourishment, hydration, sanitation. So, bathrooms that must be designed different, prayer rooms, mother's rooms, all of this together. And we are designing micro environments. The rub is that it means a redistribution strategy. So if you kind of overlay this onto like a typical manufacturing plan, you will quickly see that there's not enough of it. There's too far a distance for these people to travel. So now we have to come back to that policy side of the equation, which means that we must raise the funds, achieve consensus that we need more of it, more regularly distributed. It's really a total reevaluation of how you plan for manufacturing.
Right. And you need to, like we were saying, if you're going to argue for this, you need to sort of have the data to justify how it's going to help in the long term. I'm sure that's
you need to start with the data.
Challenge.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Sam,
And yeah, please do. No, I was just I was just going to say it's fascinating that Ford is thinking about this because they're sort of the ones that invented the assembly line, and now they're sort of, I think it's interesting to try to reinvent it. But anyway, yeah, Todd, please do weigh in.
Yeah, no, I wanted to just quickly add on to what Jennifer was saying, and I think it even ties back to what Upali was saying earlier about this idea of not necessarily taking a traditional approach to how we understand kind of what a supportive or restorative environment is. And for me, I also think, and this is something I had mentioned earlier towards the beginning, in terms of looking at some of those more less tangible factors that contribute to environments not being supportive. And I'm thinking about factory workers and the factory lines. I've done a lot of research in that area as well. But in terms of diversity, and we talk about people, right? Who's actually being staffed in certain positions. So what you often find in major factories, and I can't speak to the kind of organizational structure of Ford, so Jennifer, please feel free to interrupt me, but I'm just speaking about most American factories in general. What we often see in terms of the lower entry-level employees who make the least amount, they tend to be kind of really populated with, people of color, of a, usually of a lower level of education, right? These are our kind of baseline workers. And as you move up to management, generally it becomes more white and more male, right? As you move up. Now, what that means for a workplace environment, is an idea of perceived racism, right? And it can be perceived classism or even sexism in some cases, in terms of how women of all ethnicities, including white women, might perceive these environments. But what happens is, and there's lots of research to support that, when you have a physical environmental space or a social space where you have these perceived isms, where there's racism, sexism, classism, et cetera, that in and of itself becomes an occupational health stressor. that in and of itself becomes an environmental stressor. So even going to work where you, especially if you're a minority or you are female or you are part of any of these minority groups, and you go, you don't feel like it's a supportive environment, even with certain things in place like the meditation room or napping pods or prayer rooms, or et cetera. If you still see that type of stratification along racial or gender lines. And so I think kind of looking at those factors as well, which are kind of less immediately tangible in terms of understanding what type of space are we actually producing, we can start to address this kind of physiological and psychological stress that occurs in those type of environments. Because what we also know is that when you're in a workplace environment, especially a manufacturing environment, the higher levels of stress that's perceived by or experienced by the worker, the higher rates of injury and illness that occurs, right, on assembly lines, operating heavy machinery, repetitive motion, all of those things, because one is often distracted by the stressors that are occurring in that environment, which leaves them more susceptible to make errors, which in a factory type of setting, even with the safeguards and personal protective equipment and things of that nature, it's still not a good thing. So just kind of understanding even what type of people are we seeing, who occupies these positions as we move through the rungs of hierarchy, and understanding that those perceptions on occupational stress as well is important.
That's a great point. I mean, I would imagine those stresses are even more, more damaging if you're facing that kind of stress. So that's a really, really good point. Probably exponentially more challenging. So that's a exceptionally important point. So I think we've sort of alluded to some of the research that's being done. But I thought maybe, and maybe Todd and Sandy, you both kind of have done your research, and I know it's so, I can't say broadly. So give us an example, because, of what you do, because there's such a variety to it. But maybe even if you take a slice of it, just as an example to somebody, just so we get an idea of of sort of what goes into this kind of research about, brain health and well-being, and how, what kind of technology or what kind of methodology or what's being done. Even if you pull out one example of that, because obviously, as I said, it's a really broad topic.
Yeah, well, I'd love to tackle that, but that's one thing. We kind of moved from in-person trainings and have shown significant changes when we teach people different strategic thinking, deeper level thinking, innovation, which is kind of the brain's superpower. We have just put it on an online platform, and we have at this point almost 14,000 people enrolled from ages 18 to 100. And basically we're measuring brain health at this holistic level. So different from measuring how much depression, how much burnout, how much education, what is the difference that people have. But we're measuring what we found from our composite of 22 measures, that there were really 3 factors. And it didn't matter what the starting level of the person was, whether they didn't even have a high school education or they had a PhD. We found that people, when they developed self-agency, they actually got better piece by piece. And when I say this holistic brain health index, we found 3 factors contribute to that. One is resilience. People that look like, regardless of where they start in their job, what race, what gender they are, when they begin to realize, I need some meaningful connections and I need purpose. And we help people through this training to develop steps to develop this. And sometimes people, when their burnout sets in, then resilience helps them to still flourish at this holistic level. So one area is resilience, the other is clarity. And clarity is for people to realize it doesn't matter where your education, where you got it, where you are, what degree, what level you're starting in your job, you can be an innovative thinker. Innovation is our brain's superpower, and it gets excited. We see it in young children, and then we forget about it. But when you start with, particularly people that don't have that are starting at the low end, when they're brought in as part of the innovation, their brain turns on. And we've worked with kids in poverty and gotten them to the level of private school educated kids by building innovation, deeper level reasoning, to really feel like my brain is smart. I don't care what environment, the horrific thing that I've been through, there are things I can do to ride through that. And when their clarity gets better, and we can measure it now, their sleep gets better. And guess what? Their compassion gets better, which, Todd, as you're talking about this, how we relate to people and people that are different from us, our compassion is at an all-time low. We find that when people's clarity gets better, they're actually more open-minded. They open up to people that are different from them, and you don't have to approach it from, accept these people that are different from me, but it becomes a brain challenge and your brain embraces it. And the third area is fortitude. So clarity, resilience, and fortitude. And fortitude is the ability to have composure, emotional composure, or just this emotional stability. Even though my world is rocking, I know that there are things that can see me through. So just think about all of those being measured online. And it's not to see what's wrong with your brain or where you're failing, but to see how is it that it's you against you. It's Todd against Todd. It's Sandy against Sandy. It's Sam against Sam to do this. And we've been able to show, we've already worked with our online platform with a couple of businesses. And this last one reported 95% of the people, regardless of what level, many of them had been furloughed. Many of them had been let go. They had been through all types of financial. But when you teach the brain how to use the apps moment to moment, regardless of where you start, the brain can find ways to flourish. So it's really time for us to try to shift the conversation to, that we can measure it now. It's not this fuzzy, soft thing anymore. And, I would challenge anyone that's on the call to look at the brainhealthproject.org and enroll, do your brain health index and get coaching and do training. It's offered free online for individuals to see how you can improve in these areas. And the reason that the place work, we think about education a lot. We don't realize that most of our brain is built in the workplace for most of our life. So, if I'm building my brain, what is it? How am I going to help make sure the brain can continue to thrive and be innovative and build resilience and develop fortitude? The workplace is really one of the primaries that it grows or not. And it's up to the individual as much as the corporation. So it's trying to get them to partner with, the company, but also the individuals to become not disabled, not loss of him, but empowered to be me, but better. That's really what we've shown is possible.
Right. And it seems that's fascinating. And it seems and definitely nice to have an index versus just kind of wondering, I think that's interesting. But you're essentially measuring that. You're measuring that through you're not doing like hooking up a fMRI or something like that, but you're doing it through like a poll.
MRI, but most of them are not. No, they're doing it online. It's pencil and paper and they get a coach, but we actually validate all of it with MRI. And we've actually shown people can regain almost 2 decades back of the speed of connectivity, brain blood flow, and we didn't even have a clue that people could increase the thickness of their cortex and white matter connections when they become strategic thinkers, innovative people, as well as deeper level thinking. In a very short period of time, we're not talking about years. We've shown changes in literally 2 months, 3 months in the brain, in real life function, and in their personal relationships as well as their work relationships.
I want to thank again HKS for hosting. I want to thank all these fantastic panelists and great questions from the audience. And of course, our sponsors for Steel and Growy. Thank you so much for making this all possible. So thanks again for all being here. You did a wonderful job. And this is a great kickoff to 2022 Think Tank. Look forward to more soon.